Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time it might happen to be on whatever planet you happen to be on. Welcome once again to Full Fat Spoiler Chat, the show in which we, the folks at Nerd Caliber, talk about a recent piece of entertainment in depth and in detail, where we talk about things we liked about it, didn't like about it, things that were good, bad, themes, tone, messages, all of the big stuff, which means, as it says in the name right below here, that we have to spoil it. So, I'm Rodney Brown. I'm editor-in-chief of Nerd Caliber, first-person shooter on Facebook, Burley underscore adopter on Twitter, a couple of other places. Joining me tonight to talk about, in case you haven't seen this by the title of the thing that you clicked on, or by the images behind both of us, joining me tonight to talk about Dune is geez, we're even kind of wearing like crew necks together. And wow.
Get your sweet Norton motorcycle shirt on.
No, I don't have a motorcycle shirt on. Okay.
I will.
Is my sort of doppelganger, Greg, if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Greg Snyder, aka Wonder Llama, assistant editor here at Nerd Caliber, longtime contributor. If you've watched any of our various Nerd Week live shows, you'll know that Rodney and I are two genuinely gushing fanboys over Dune. The books in particular, the David Lynch 1984 movie has its own unique charms, and this one in particular. If you're interested in checking it out, I did a fairly spoiler-free review on nerdcaliber.com last week of the new Denis Villeneuve movie that came out last week. Mostly thoughts, feelings, opinions, which we'll probably cover a lot of here tonight. But if you don't want anything spoiled, as Rodney always likes to say, this may not be the program for you. Go to nerdcaliber.com, check out my review, and then check this out on YouTube later on as it's posted up.
Exactly. And by the way, after his editor got done with it, it was pretty much completely spoiler free. So, uh, anyway, already in the chats, my phone, welcome to the show. And before we get started, I've started doing this, folks. We're trying to really enhance our followers, our viewership, our activity on Twitch. So if you have a Twitch account, please go to the URL on your screen right now, twitch.tv/nerdcaliber, and follow us. Maybe at some point watch us on that platform. Our live shows are streamed on YouTube, on Facebook Live, and of course on Twitch. We'd love to have you join us there. So check it out, folks, twitch.tv/nerdcaliber. So what we're going to do, as we always do with the show, is we're going to do sort of a round robin of, we start with what we like, we move to what we didn't like, then we move on to tone, theme, message, and so on. But we start with an explanation of what this is and where it came from. So Dune 2021 movie, co-written and directed by Denis Villeneuve, is based on the book of the same name from way back in 1965. Just to let you know, when I was 5 years old. That has become one of the actual linchpins of, we'll say, modern being post-50s, science fiction. Dune is one of the most complex stories, both from a plot standpoint and thematically and from a world building standpoint, that you can ever read. Which, for many people like myself, and I'm pretty sure like Greg, makes up for the fact that Herbert, dialogue isn't necessarily a strong suit. It's not bad. But, as compared to some other people who make people jump right off the page with the words they say, not so much.
I would say I would call it more or less contemporary from that perspective, with a lot of other stuff that came out around that time.
That is true.
As far as dialogue goes. And I would, everyone throws this around, and, Tolkien is the gold standard for so many things. It's in no way remotely like Lord of the Rings, but in terms of world building, scope, just the vastness of story of characters, of backstory. If you're somebody like me that loves, here's the plot, here's the story that comes before the plot, and a lot of stuff to dive deep into. Dune, much like Lord of the Rings, is just chock full of it.
Yep.
Sorry, Rodney, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Nope, that's okay. Dune, the book, when published, had appendices. Frank Herbert wrote appendices so that you could know more about the history of Dune. And then explored it further and further in many, many, many more books. And then he passed away, and his son took over and explored it in even many, many, many more books.
Also like Tolkien.
Also like Tolkien. So what we are going to talk about here. So Dune is, in case you haven't seen it, let's try to give a plot description without being too spoilery. It's the story of Paul, 15-year-old son of a noble house. In the Facebook chats, Lee, welcome to the show. Glad you're here. It was so good. And amazing that this is from 1965. I was 13 when I first read Dune. I notice things more and more every time I read it. The world building and the use of religion always fascinated me. Bingo.
That's a big point. We definitely need to touch on that, especially in 2020-21 context.
Yep. Oh, and I forgot we were talking about food and so many other wonderful things before the show started. Greg, I forgot to mention, when we do get into that, let's try not to do any spoilers for the second movie. Because this is a show as though people had just watched Dune and maybe didn't read the book. We don't want to give away too much. And there's an awful lot about talking about the, the themes and the tones and the messages and the religion and so on that can be spoil some of the later stuff. So
cogitate on that.
Yeah.
And there's actually your first spoiler, folks. This movie is 2 parts.
Yep.
I'll throw this out now. Part 1 has been in the making for a long time. Obviously, COVID added challenges to that, but just being released now on the big screen. It's also on HBO Max for streaming. I highly recommend seeing it in the theater. There's a lot of movies that it's a good home theater system.
But Greg, we haven't got to our recommendation at the end. Yeah, we're both recommend. I mean,
Sorry.
come on. It's us.
Sorry, I'll just say it. See it in the theater if you're so inclined. But back to the part 1, part 2 thing. If you don't know, there's so much material. There was just no way to do it justice in one part. Through a lot of inside baseball, probably not worth diving into. It wasn't clear that part 2 was going to get made. They just officially greenlit it after a very successful opening weekend, which thumbs up, 2 thumbs up, 4 thumbs up.
Big, yes, 4 thumbs up.
So
thumbs up with some pinkies.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, if you don't know the plot, go see it.
Yes. And so the easiest or the shortest description of that plot is Paul Atreides, 15-year-old son of a noble house in a galactic empire where his family is living on a sort of a beautiful oceany, world, and they are given the control of a planet called Arrakis, which is the most important planet in the universe because it's the only place where you can get spice. They never actually use this word in the movie, but it's called melange, which has life extension properties. Most people live to around 200. But most importantly, it has sort of psychic activation properties that is used by the navigators of the Spacing Guild, which is the only way to get from star to star. And without it, interstellar travel would not be possible. So it's literally the most important thing. And it can only be done at Arrakis. And the story unfolds about the real reason why they were sent there and its intrigue and plots and so on. It involves the Fremen, the people, the indigenous, well, not indigenous, I guess indigenous, the humans that are living indigenous. There. I mean, it's an alien world, so they're not indigenous. They didn't develop there, but
call them first people.
First people,
because that's effectively what they are in this context.
Oh, that's so. So Lee says Dune was what me and CJ bonded over. We are both huge fans. That's like right there. And also, we saw it in IMAX. Incredible. Music Boy on YouTube. Welcome to the chat. Once again, we're talking about Dune and we're going to spoil it. That's why the show's called Full Fat Spoiler Chat. So if you haven't seen it and you don't want spoilers, thanks for stopping by.
Go see it, come back, watch the YouTube.
Exactly.
Or and for the folks that have chimed in, thank you very much for your comments. If you're new, feel free to chime in. Feel free to add some comments in here. We love getting feedback from people. This is such a dense material that everyone's observations and opinions and thoughts on it are unique. So don't hesitate to text away.
Exactly. And thank you, Lee. That's a great, simple explanation. Yeah, I'm not known for my brevity, but thanks. And because neither of us are known for our brevity, we're going to jump right into this. So, Greg, we're going to start with you. Without going for a couple of hours, give me, say, your top handful, whatever number you want to call that, things that you liked about this.
Top handful of things I liked. It looked on screen as close to what I thought Arrakis, Caladan, all of the characters, the technology, the sandworms, just about as close as what I saw there, having read the book quite a few times, as I saw on screen, which is stunning considering what a it jumps from planet to planet. Caladan, the Atreides homeworld, is very much, I think it was filmed in the Hebrides. It's got that very green, rich, wet kind of, Scottish feel to it. Arrakis is
Norway.
Norway, okay. So similar part of the world to the Hebrides. By contrast, Arrakis, where most of the movie takes place, is a desert, and a very harsh one at that. The scope, the scale, the visual impact, just absolutely top notch. Highlight number 2 for me was the casting and, by extension, the acting. I personally, for my opinion, I couldn't single out any person I thought was miscast or that didn't kick butt in the role that they played. Could someone else have done a better job? Who knows? Hard to say. But generally speaking, the acting was superb. Timothée Chalamet in particular did a great job of that. He was, starts off as this, cocky prince who's coddled and loved by an entire planet. And by the end of part 1, his world has been completely turned upside down in every sense of the word. He's discovering powers he didn't know he has. He's prophesying things that no sane human being would ever want to be part of. And he sells that conflict, that where do I go with this stuff? Oscar Isaac is fantastic as Duke Leto. I've heard a couple of people say they didn't care for Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho. Again, your opinion may vary, but I personally, I don't love Jason Momoa. He's a big, goofy guy. Yeah. He's great in some things that call for Jason Momoa to be Jason Momoa, but he did a fantastic job as Duncan.
And he is the least Jason Momoa he's ever been in this.
Pretty much.
The scene where he's after he's shaved, once he's come in from the Fremen, where he went early to connect with them, and so he's sitting in the stillsuits with Paul and Gurney and a bunch of other people waiting to go on this trip, and he's talking about how amazing the Fremen society is and how they live and work with the desert, and it's just like, that's Jason Momoa. Like, where's the bro and dudes? And
he's like miles away from Aquaman. He's miles and miles away from Game of Thrones. Yeah, I mean, Josh Brolin was pretty solid as Gurney Halleck. I thought Javier Bardem as Stilgar, spot on, absolutely spot on performance for that. And we couldn't talk about the acting without talking about Stellan Skarsgård as
Oh,
Baron Harkonnen. That, I mean, he's Baron Harkonnen is top 5 villains in sci-fi fantasy. Sauron, Darth Vader, Baron Harkonnen all have to be in the same, the top 3 conversation.
yep.
Um, Played it with this sort of subtle but never far below the surface menace and threat, and just I'm getting like a little squicked out even just thinking about the performance, because you do not want to be in a room with this guy. Um, so the top couple of things there. Yep, there you go. That the screenshot that Roddy just put up on the video is uh, from kind of the aftermath of a very pivotal scene in part 1, and oh god, it's creepy as all bleep.
Yep.
Love the score. I'm not usually a huge fan of Hans Zimmer. I find that Inception-esque ultra low bassy stuff is very overused. But because the Fremen are in the book largely Arabian kind of nomadic, or 8,000 years in the future, if you took nomadic tribes from North Africa,
Two more thousand. 10,000.
X thousand years, the nomadic tribes of North Africa, of Arabia, of the Levant, and put them into space. That's basically them. So the soundtrack had a very Middle Eastern flair, a very Persian feel to it that was well suited. I think in a way, one of the most successful things is the fact that I've read the book a bunch of times. I've got the audiobook. I've watched the David Lynch movie more than a couple of times. I've watched the what do you call it? Why can't I think of his name? The guy who tried to make it. I'm blanking on his name. Jaranovsky.
Hodorowski.
Hodorowski. Thank you. The DVD of the attempt to get that made. Suffice to say, I know the story fairly well. The fact that certain action scenes still made me like I could literally feel my pulse going up and my heart like thump 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 thump. I knew what was going to happen. I know, there's no true mystery as to whether this person is going to survive a knife fight or that person is going to survive a sandworm attack, unless Denis Villeneuve just threw the script out completely and said, "Whatever, folks." And the fact that it was still like edge of the seat, like Silence of the Lambs level of tension, Hunt for Red October the first time you see it when the subs are fighting, it was reminiscent of that. Like, holy bleep, what's going to happen? Oh my god. That's impressive because the outcome already. It's pre-spoiled in a sense if you've read the book. I was really impressed by that, and the fact that it was 2.5 hours would probably scare off a lot of people or give people pause.
Doesn't feel like it.
It felt like 90 plus. It was just it.
Yep.
You know what? I can't even say it hums. In my review, I use the phrase slow, fast, slow pacing.
Yeah.
There's parts where the pacing is languid. It's very relaxed. It lets the story breathe. It lets the characters breathe. It's not trying to fill every minute of every frame with an action sequence or a knife fight or a sandworm attack or something. And there's no jump scares. It's not like we're walking in the desert. Oh no, a sandworm. It builds.
Because you see that stuff way off in the distance.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think a lot of people who are used to modern filmmaking stuff or a lot of it that expect just nonstop back to back to back stuff may find the pacing slow. I personally love the fact that, much like Villeneuve's other movies, Blade Runner 2049, there is a lot of world building through cinematography where there's nothing much happening, but there's a lot going on.
And through score, like you were talking about the Zimmer score. Prior to this, I was listening on repeat the Atreides the Atreides March that starts with one soul bagpipe and then that drum and pipe insanity You know,
Mm-hmm.
that you could listen to that at full volume and then, run out and fight a bear. It's just amazing. Uh, Before we jump back into your stuff, Lee, I love that they made Gurney a bard again. When he was reciting, that made me smile. Josh Brolin was incredible. Timothy nailed it. Yes, absolutely. And since you mentioned this, I can't get through the miniseries because of Blonde Paul. Nah, I'm all set. There's a
uh,
lot in that miniseries to not get through. Although, Leto the Second, James McAvoy, I forgot about that.
ooh,
Young James McAvoy plays
true.
Leto the Second. So,
So there you go. There's my. You wanted a relatively brief my top X number of things. That's it. That's my tops.
all right, I'll see if I can keep mine into about 10 minutes too. Not sure, but if I don't, we'll go back to
And go.
go. So first off, the things that you said, of course. Denis Villeneuve is an absolute visual genius. Nobody, but nobody does science fiction scale like Villeneuve. Um, Here's the scene where Leto and Thufir Hawat and Gurney Halleck are lined up, and of course all of the family and troops are lined up behind them as they're accepting the Herald of the Change, giving them the assignment to Arrakis. Here's the ship that they landed in, and down in the right corner, that's the army lined up. And if this was big enough, you could see the stage that they're on. That's about the same size as one of the pads of the spaceship. Yeah, just nobody but nobody does scale like this guy, in a science fiction setting. And that's not all he does. If you've seen Prisoners, talk about horrifying personal tension throughout that entire movie. That movie is almost all close-ups or 2-3 person shot close-ups.
Yeah. I would just very briefly on that. He, in a sense, radically different. This is a comparison or analogy, not a comparison. Kind of reminded me of Wes Anderson in how incredibly particular framing of the shots is,
yes,
and how people are placed. He composes scenes the way really good photographers compose still shots, much like Wes Anderson, where everything is in a place and that place is important to what's happening.
Paul, one of the first times you see him in the Ducal Palace on Arrakis, just, the scene actually stretches out. I had to crop it for this format, but it actually stretches out quite a bit on either side. And he's a little figure in this massive corridor lit by the insanely bright, light of daytime on Arrakis from a little tiny window. It's just, yeah, 100% agree. So he's a visual genius. The script, I kind of missed some things that they cut out and some things that they apparently filmed and never put in. They filmed the dinner party scene, but apparently never put it in. But the way they took some of the elements that were presented in those scenes and put them in other areas, like Leto's internal monologue thinking about his father, the bullfighter, in the dinner party scene, is handled in that one scene where Paul and Leto were talking in the graves on Caladan of all of their previous ancestors. So yeah, it really well done. Villeneuve co-wrote the script along with one of the industry giants, Eric Roth, who's written, back into the 1970s. The guy has just written a ton of stuff. And this kind of blew my mind. What is the guy's name? John Spate? Spates. Doctor Strange. Cool. Prometheus. And Passengers. The Chris Pratt, Jennifer Lawrence, non-consent in space, let's kill a woman because I'm lonely movie. Just terrible movie. But he wrote Doctor Strange, and so yeah, whatever he brought to the table, he brought the right stuff to the table. So the script did a very good job of taking that massive, well, half of a book, half of a massive book, and winnowing out some of the things that didn't need to be there and combining a few things into other stuff. They made a couple of mistakes, I think, in that part, and we'll get to that in some of the things that I can't even say I dislike. I don't know that there's a dislike in this whole thing. But yeah, the rest of the cast is fantastic. I kind of miss melancholy, happy-go-lucky at times Gurney Halleck. But Josh Brolin's grumpy Gurney Halleck was awesome. A wonderful change. If you're going to make a change, that was a great one. And the important secondary characters, I can't call them minor secondary characters. Charlotte Rampling as the Reverend Mother, just perfect. Absolutely.
My only complaint is there wasn't enough of it.
Yep. Or here's one of my big there wasn't enough of it. David Dastmalchian as Piter de Vries was so good.
Oof.
I wanted so much more of Piter, because there are other scenes where he has more to do, but alas,
talk about someone you don't want to meet in a dark alley.
Oh jeez, yeah. Not at all. Let's see what. So yeah, cast fantastic, and they all did a fantastic job. And again, we talked about this. Even Jason Momoa, the least Jason Momoa thing,
and Dave Bautista as well.
Yep.
Another person who obviously came from a background other than acting and has really evolved into acting, much like Dwayne Johnson and Jason Momoa. The character he plays doesn't require a lot of range. It's well suited to a big, hulking, angry, I don't think Dave Bautista, the wrestler, was necessarily a steroid guy. I have no idea, but Beast Ravan is kind of, you could see him as just completely turned his brain to pudding with steroids or whatever the outer space equivalent would be in 10,000 years.
Yeah, that rage has got to come from somewhere. I mean, granted, it comes from it's almost genetic in that family, but he's like the pinnacle of that. Lee, he really made a great Piter. Yeah, I've been kind of a fan of David Dastmalchian, but other than like his appearance in Dark Knight and as one of the Arkham Asylum guys who pretends to be a cop, until the Suicide Squad, where he was Polka Dot Man, I didn't really know that much about him. And then I was like, oh my God, he's so good. And then thinking about that, and okay, how's he going to do Piter? And
he did.
He did. He nailed it.
So, you don't think of a casting director and their team as being critical to the success of a movie. Obviously, you think of them when the movie is terribly cast, but I don't know offhand who the casting director is. The name probably wouldn't mean much either way. Yeah. But kudos to that person, because they found a spot on actor and actress for basically every role that wasn't like, well, we really like Josh Brolin was under contract, let's shoehorn him in, we'll give him a role. Yeah. There was no aspect of that.
So Gina J and Francine Meisler. And again, I could look them up on IMDb, but
thanks, guys. Great job.
Yes. Lee, I am in love with Timothy's performance. He captured how Paul was confused, scared, complex, hyper-intelligent, and well-trained. Amazing. Absolutely. The production design. So as it turns out, this production designer is apparently like Denis Villeneuve's go-to. So has been the production designer on, Arrival, which makes sense, but also Enemy and Prisoners, which don't look anything. There's no science fiction whatsoever. Well, Enemy's anyway. But look at the ornithopters. Damn, they're awesome. Everything about this is awesome. the production, the difference between the Harkonnen world, the Atreides world on Caladan, and then the sort of ducal palace on Arrakis that is its own design, you know, which isn't based on either of those two. The Sardaukar are clearly different in every way, their armor, their language, everything, than you know, the Harkonnen troops from Gedi Prime, then the Atreides troops. Fantastic job, absolutely fantastic job, and of course the sandworms. Jesus, oh, awesome.
So while we're talking about likes and probably segueing into dislikes, can we use the sandworms as our segue there?
Let's do that because it's about 10
Okay.
minutes. So I think I've just, let's see, is there anything I really, really wanted to nail in the stuff I loved? I got most of it.
Okay. So if you're a fan
Dislikes.
of the books, even if you don't really know what it is, sandworms have become so iconic in science fiction and in pop culture fiction. I think an awful lot of people would know what a sandworm is. I mean, if you've ever seen Beetlejuice, it's Tim Burton's equivalent or take on a sandworm. Um, Everyone's got a different image in their mind. David Lynch's sandworm was very different than Denis Villeneuve's sandworm. What did you think of the look of the, especially the maw, the mouth, the gaping, you know, the something the size of 8 school buses?
I loved it because this is as close to what I had in my mind when I first read the book as anything I've ever seen. Um, I didn't dislike the 1984 the Lynch version. I thought that was an interesting take, a little Tremors like, but you know, I think Tremors came out later. Um, but I just, you know, I always envisioned it as a worm. So the mouth is, in fact, a sphincter that closes, and it's not any sort of tripartite or what multiple part jaw. Now,
Hinged.
and the teeth, they're a little baleen like for my taste. I'd picture them to be a little bit shorter, but I get it. It makes sense because you know the comparison here is that the sand on Arrakis is, for all intents and purposes, water on any other world. The way the sandworms move through it is like a whale moving through water. So, yeah, I get it. What about you?
Uh, Very much the same take. I thought that it was much closer to a, you know, a 14-foot long, 300-foot around worm than, so, you know, a legless, faceless space dragon, which, you know, sometimes that gets called up. There's the teeth of the sandworms are considered sacred to the Fremen. Again, sort of what I would guess I would refer to as the First Nation, First Peoples. Um, and in reading it, I always kind of thought of that more like a tooth, like a great white shark tooth would be, or like a megalodon times 10.
Yeah.
A tooth from a shark like that. But in this visualization, in this version of it, it is much more like baleen on, you know, whales that take, you know, that suck things in and strain it through the baleen. And I think the sense of like using those the way your esophagus works, where it contracts and expands and forces things down. Um, I mean, I found that very believable. I think that they would be, you know, they would grab onto whatever constitutes prey, and not just swallow it whole and then, you know, the way a snake does. It would actually force that in. Um, and then the crysknife, which is the primary Fremen weapon, which are made from the teeth of the sandworms. The production design, for obvious reasons, did a great job of echoing the size, the look,
Yep.
Of what the sandworm tooth, you know, just call it a tooth because that's what they call it. So yeah, I mean, I didn't have any issue with that change. I mean, because, you know, ultimately it's an imaginary creature, so everyone's what you see here after reading it, or what you see if you've never read the book, you don't know anything about it, you just walk in because you hear it's a cool movie. I would like to think that you would look at that and go, holy crap, that is a giant monster.
Yep. Yeah, I get that. And so I'm a little confused as to whether this is a like or a dislike, but we'll call it, mostly a like.
Very, in my case, very much alike. I
Yeah.
thought it was very much alike, and especially by virtue of how much CGI has improved since the David Lynch era, where the matting, where they're running alongside and climbing onto it, um, is so fake looking in 1984 and so natural and realistic looking in 2021.
Yep. In the one little tiny bit you get to see of it,
Yeah.
but it's still awesome. Lee, I guess this is from a while ago, had to go. Thanks for stopping by and chatting. We'll see you probably at an upcoming con. So, having just dumped our love all over sandworms, like sandworms vomiting up spice all over the sand, uh, Greg dislikes.
Um,
The short section, folks.
right. I can't. I'm hard pressed to really list off a whole lot of stuff. Um, the thing that's an obvious shortcoming, I'm willing to accept to make this movie workable. Um, the For many years, this the book was considered one of those unfilmable classics because of its depth of history, of characters, of religion, of mysticism, of different planets, etc. That the technology just didn't exist to do it right, and the runtime wouldn't support being able to fully flesh out what a mentat is and why that is such a critical component to the year, I don't recall it, let's just call it the year 10,000 in human evolution.
I think it's 10,149.
There you go. So the 11,000th century of human evolution. um, I would have liked if they had been able to elaborate on some of that a little bit more. I thought Dr. Yue got a little. His story is so critical.
Yep.
They condensed it. They shorthanded it. Um,
I would
there's
even go so
not.
far as pretty much just tossed most of it aside.
Yeah, exactly. Um, what do you call it? Dr. Kynes got was improved in some ways. She was a very likable character. Her conflict between what she's kind of, let's just say, kind of programmed how to respond, and what she in her soul thinks and feels and wants. She did a really good job of portraying that. But Kynes is another pivotal secondary character that drives the story in so many places that her character was kind of was shorthand as well. Um, the explanation of the Bene Gesserit and how much of the power behind the power that group is, and how it's how it relates to Jessica, how it very relates to Timothy to Paul Atreides. Um, it's so complex they couldn't really do a good job of it. So I wanted more of that.
Now, I
But
will
I
say that
also
without giving out any spoilers as to how or why it would happen, it is entirely possible that in some of the scenes that happen in the second half of the book, more of that uh, Paul becomes aware of. So we would become more aware of it.
yeah, even things like shout out Mapes,
Yeah.
almost a tertiary character, but this there was literally just like, oh hey, you want to be the maid? Oh no, you have a knife. Now you're dead.
Yeah.
It's part one, so that's not a spoiler. But Shout Out is a fairly important character as a bridge between the Atreides and the Harkonnen side of things, call it the Imperium side of things, and the Fremen side of things. Um, Very much shorthanded.
Yeah.
Condensed is probably a better way to put it. Um, I get it. I think they did as good a job of boiling down the essentials to fit the runtime and still make it possible for people that aren't familiar with the book, with the story, with all of the ancillary stuff to follow what's happening. My one complaint, in a sense, is actually a little bit of kudos that they could take something this complex, boil it down, and it didn't feel simplistic or overly. Let's just cut out everything that isn't sandworms eating harvesters. Because I mean, honestly, that's what you go to see. You want to see a sandworm eat a harvester,
Right. And not rely on, as David Lynch did, right mostly out of the book, internal voice monologues. God, tough way to make a movie, man.
One of my other dislikes, and again, this is a relatively minor thing because of the necessity, there was a moderate amount of exposition. It wasn't huge. I thought it was couched in a way, it was framed in a way that made some sense and made it palatable. It wasn't just the analogy I thought of was the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, where they do the sort of the flashback where Galadriel is describing the entire history of the end of the Second Age and Isildur and Sauron, etc. I never really cared for that much, just because it was like, you don't really need that exposition there. That's starting the Shire. Okay. Not to get off track there, but a lot of here's what a sandworm is was done framed of Paul watching like a hologram, like a holo video,
right,
of a lesson on Arakan, biology, and so it worked.
It worked, and that is mentioned in the books that Paul was studying.
Mm-hmm.
Now it doesn't actually have any scenes where you get to listen to his lessons as well, but you've got to think that some of the quotes from the beginning of different chapters in Dune in the book might have come from some of the things he was studying. So it's almost kind of in the book, except presented in a slightly different way. But I get that. There is a couple of scenes where you sit there. It's like my biggest thing when I heard it is that Thufir talking? Who did these for Paul? Or is this like, Encyclopedia Imperia on Arrakis? But yeah. Anything else in the dislike category?
Not really. Nitpicking, but
yeah. So I have one, which I think. So let's start with the one I agree. I agree with your take on UA. That's a really important scene, a really important heel turn. And while the actor did an excellent job, having more backstory as to why it might happen would have built up some more tension when it did happen. And this is just my personal theory, but where Yue is talking about how the Baron was taking apart and putting back together his wife, Wana. I think the thing that's walking around on 6 hands in the scene where the Reverend Mother shows up and talks to the Baron might be Wana, or partly Wana. Also,
that's a deep
that was creepy as hell.
Also creepy as hell.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I agree with that. Yue was short shrifted. There was a couple of other scenes and characters that would have expanded things. I thought they did a pretty good job with Liat Kynes. They did cut out some things, but I think they did a much better job than either of the 2 iterations before with presenting Liat Kynes' role in the escape.
Yeah.
And Liat Kynes' spoiler chat, death in this is way more awesome than the way it actually happened in the book.
Yeah. For sure.
So the one criticism I have in the production design, the special effects, everything, Arakeen itself looked fake. Um,
Fair. Arcane,
everything else in
explain to people listening that aren't familiar what
so
you're referring to.
Arakeen is the only city on Arrakis. It's where the Ducal Palace is. It's where the spaceport is. It's where all the spice harvesting, refining happens before it gets shipped off world. It's surrounded by an enormous shield wall to keep sandworms out. And it's inside a ring basically of mountains, with sort of one pass into the desert. Um, in all of the books, Arakeen is described very much like think of like an awful lot of the places that Spike Spiegel runs around in on Mars. Looks like North Africa, or Egypt, or all sorts of places like that, except futuristic and scientific, and or science fiction and so on. This looked like one of those models of like a giant interconnected industrial plant. There was no, and granted, it's Arrakis, you don't go outside to do a lot of stuff, but the people living on the planet know how to handle that. There's no indication of any life in any of the buildings other than when they got to the Ducal Palace.
Yeah.
And the spaceport, of course, and the refinery. So that was my real, oh boy, they missed that.
They're probably, again, because you've got to pick what you can and can't include. There was no flavor of the slums and ghettos that surrounded. For folks that aren't familiar with it, think about, I don't know, parts of the Middle East where you've got insane amounts of wealth concentrated in small areas, surrounded by insane amount of poverty and subsistence level, hand to mouth existence. That is very much present and plays a key role in some of the conspiracies and the who's talking to who in the books. But if you didn't, there's no aspect of that around the main city of Arakeen. It's just this big, it almost looks like the world's biggest Lego set that got really painted and aged and let a bunch of people go to town on. I hadn't thought about it, but I agree. It's but to me that feels like
Yeah.
If that's the one thing that it misses.
And same here. I think when you look at the rest of the scope of the world and how they integrated it as a living, functioning thing, early on, these are the harvesters that the Harkonnens use. And this is the harvesting facility when the Harkonnens were in control. Tons of the gigantic storage tanks, and the harvesters are even bigger. You get to see the lifters carrying them, off to do their harvesting. Everything else, fantastic job. I can't wait to see what Siege Tabor looks like. But that one thing just really was so not like anything else. It really threw me. Other than that, it's, little detaily stuff. Why is Thufir Hawat's uniform straight up Gang of Four era communist China, and everybody else is in these, black and gray and silver?
Boss.
Yeah, I don't really get that.
You could take a standard issue Star Wars Imperial officer uniform, zhuzh it up with some epaulets and some chains and some, take your little red and blue rank insignia and put on more traditional medals. They're very similar in that regard.
Yeah. So, again, there's Leto in his best finery, awaiting the Herald of the Change, who, by the way, thank God for representation. This is the Herald of the Change. I don't recall that there's a single blackface, certainly in either version, and hardly a brown face, maybe in the miniseries. Um, and this, the Fremen are wonderfully portrayed as a wide variety of brown and black people. Um, but at the highest level of the Imperium, the person who comes to present uh, the changeover from control of Caladan to Arrakis is a black man. Like, awesome. Which is a good thing. It's we're in things.
And just looking through, it wasn't quite as clear from just watching the movie because they're all in still suits. But the actor who plays Jameis is he Nigerian or Sudanese? Nigerian. Spot on casting for that. Another relatively small part in the overall picture, but incredibly pivotal in its own way. Fantastic job. It is much more diverse, and I think it's much more representative of what, if you're being realistic and not xenophobic, racist, etc., the human expansion into the universe 8 or 10,000 years from now is going to be white, pink, brown, yellow, beige, dark color, like every possible skin tone and combination.
Yep.
The previous movies where everybody is basically white didn't really, even I think then when I saw it, didn't entirely ring true.
Yeah.
Especially because Frank Herbert in the books is pretty clear about kind of, who looks like what.
Right. The Emperor is named Shaddam. A slightly Persian-esque version of Saddam. Jose Ferrer, was Jose Ferrer?
Yep.
In the David Lynch movie was a pretty solid casting for that. He certainly is a much more ethnic version than any other emperor that, the one in the miniseries. But yeah, so, and like the little, Thufir's uniform, no braid for Yue. That's a sign of the Sook school is, the hair braid, but okay. That's fine. They gave him the diamond. That's important. And then no backstory. We talked about that. Was a little confused why the Harkonnen spice harvesters are different looking than the Atreides spice harvesters, which are these flat ones here, when the equipment was left for them. And at the beginning, in that narration at the beginning, Chani Zendaya says, they do their harvesting before, the heat of the day comes up. And then you see that, no, in fact, they harvest like all the time because you have to. And in the book, anytime you see, there's a scene with a harvester, it's in the middle of the day. So, those are, I almost think that like they filmed that early to get stuff for like trailers and things, and then the rest of it was done afterward. But I don't know.
Again, little stuff. It didn't, for my take. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I didn't really, if I noticed it, it didn't really register as what the bleep.
Yeah, and other than Arakeen, which I thought, which that bothered me right out of the gate. Any of these minor criticisms or observation notes, I literally took notes the second time I watched it. So I'm sitting there on my laptop typing, ooh, okay, all right. So really, it took a second viewing for me to say, oh, wow, where's the braid for Yue? I didn't even think about it in the first time. All right, so that's it. That's our dislikes. Tone, theme, message, etc. Again, without trying to spoil anything for the second movie, Greg, what do you think about the overall tone, and what do you think they were trying to say?
Overall tone was solid. I think it captured the the sort of the trope of the white savior while uh, setting up. Let's just say setting up the fact that Frank Herbert really wasn't writing a story about Orientalism or white saviors coming in to fix a bunch
Right.
of brown and black people in their own world.
Yeah, we won't
Um,
say why, but if you watch through to the end of this, the second part, which is the end of the book, you'll come to realize that that is kind of the opposite of what Herbert was writing about.
yep. Um, so I think it sets that up relatively well. We'll have another one of these next year after part two comes out, or the year after, whatever the date is. I don't recall.
23,
Um,
2023.
the I was impressed by the fact that kind of the main areas we have. You've got the Harkonnen homeworld. You've got Arrakis. You've got Caladan, the Atreides homeworld. Radically different in climate, in architecture, etc. They each, as you alluded to earlier, they each had their own unique feel and flavor, and that really kind of helped keep things. This is what these people are. It's a little it's a little bit like when producers don't necessarily trust the audience to make their figure stuff out, so they have to use like ominous music when something bad's about to happen.
So all the Power Rangers
They
have different colors, so you can tell them
exactly
apart.
the the beautiful sweeping majestic northern European Caladan is clearly supposed to be wonderful and great and noble and exceptional. um the Harkonnen homeworlds, what you see of it is mostly interior stuff. It's dark, brooding, it's terrifying. It's clearly these people are bad. So while I thought they were beautiful and distinct, I found that a little less subtle than a lot of other stuff. So the message, uh, I feel like, is largely going to be in part two, because
Yep.
so much of part one is setting the table, which made it. I knew roughly where it was going to end. I knew about the scene towards the end. It was clearly the pivotal kind of denouement, and I still left there going, why do I gotta wait 2 years if it even happens?
Exactly.
So I'm familiar with the message, with the themes of religion, of xenophobia, of climate change is a huge piece for Frank Herbert, about yanking resources off a planet without considering what it does to the planet. Those are huge components to what drove Herbert to write this book in the early 60s, when nobody thought about climate change or about ecological destruction. Would probably be in that era probably a more accurate um, sort of theme that he was concerned about. It doesn't have time to get into the Fremen religion, who they worship, why they worship the way they do. um, Again, table setting. It's a little disappointing. I completely get it, and frankly I'm glad that they didn't try to force more. Let's cram some of this in and get a little Shai Halud over here and get a little Baker over here, and let's just get it all in because we got 2 hours to fill.
Yep.
Thank you, thank you for not crushing that in.
But
um
also teasing it. I mean, one of
geez,
Paul's visions shows Jessica in what appears to have writing across her face. Um, and for those of us who've read the book, we know what they're teasing there. And it's like, okay, second half or this part two, yeah, we're going to start getting some of that. Yeah.
um in a way, Dune the book is very similar to kind of the two halves. There's a lot more inner monologue and thinking on paper that comes out that explains some of the religion, some of the ecology, etc., some of the backstory. But you really can separate the, like, the where we start, we get into Arrakis, the battles happen, Paul and Jessica wind up where they wind up, the things happen the way they do. I would almost say that the book is 2 acts rather than 3 acts more traditionally.
Yeah.
You could nitpick or finesse that however you want, but there's very much the like, here's what happens first, and then when it gets to this point, here's everything that happens after that. So I'm looking forward to them exploring a little more of the religion, the ecological damage, the Harkonnens are presented as cruel, vindictive, evil, horrible examples of humanity. They don't really get as much. Well, actually, no, that's not true. I was going to say they don't get so much into just the sheer greed. But yeah, Baron's comments about it's all about money. Go get me my money.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, or start releasing spice from our stores, but don't do it too fast because it'll cause a collapse in the pricing.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's all about that.
It's all about the money.
Yeah.
So how that plays into the greed versus planetary conservation is a big piece in the stories. Hopefully, it's a big piece in the second half of the movie.
Yep.
Or it plays a part. It doesn't have to be. We don't want a retake on long scenes of senators talking about imperial taxation and trade routes.
Oh God, please no.
What's your take?
So
buddy?
tone, I agree. I think it does shift in tone as it needs to from planet to planet, but I think overall, this first half anyway, and I think this is building up to a shift in tone in the second part, is kind of melancholy. As beautiful as Caladan is, it's clearly cold. It's very now that I know it's filmed in Norway, it's like, oh yeah, okay. I mean, this is like straight up, pine trees and fjords, and it's not a summery looking place.
Did you just say pining for the fjords?
No, I said pine trees in the fjords, but
sorry to interrupt. Go on.
That's okay. It's Norwegian blue. So I think the whole thing is melancholy, up to the point of maybe even bordering on depression. Particularly from Paul's standpoint and what happens to him, what happens to his family, what is going to happen to him, which he kind of really knows is coming. And I think that's very important in setting up, kind of his headspace for what happens in part 2. Message, again, I agree. I don't think, there is no message in this one really other than kind of, greed is bad and power corrupts, which is, it's true for the most part. The message will get a lot more complicated and a lot deeper, assuming they don't make any really major changes to that message in the second part. So, we're running late, so we're going to do this thing that I just decided we're going to do real quickly, and then we'll jump into recommendations, which, of course, we both recommend. But anyway. Put you on the spot. So, this isn't a giveaway. They've mentioned the Emperor. We know that an Emperor is coming. This is kind of a giveaway, but if you've seen the previous movie, there's a character, the Emperor's daughter, Princess Irulan, moderately important. Casting. Who do you want to see as the Emperor? Who do you want to see as Irulan?
I don't have a good answer for that, to be honest. We talked about this a little the other night, and I kind of scoured some different sites and some, actors lists. I didn't come up with a good answer for either of those. I'm trusting that the casting director and their team did a fantastic job with the character so far, that they're not gonna, they're not just gonna pick some There won't be stunt casting.
Yeah. I have a kind of stunt casting, but it's a diversity stunt casting. Um, the emperor's name Shaddam. That could also be a North African or Egyptian. Denzel Washington.
Ooh,
I want to see Denzel Washington, and therefore Irulan could be any raft of wonderful young black actresses. But again, this is my stunt casting part of it. Willow Smith,
interesting.
right age, huge draw. Irulan doesn't need to be a fantastic actor, but I'm assuming Willow Smith is pretty good. Um, so, Denny, if you haven't cast these already and you're watching, which I'm sure you are, there you go. Denzel Washington and Willow Smith.
Interesting. I guess I could sort of see that. Trying to think of who else I could see. I mean, it's tough because, yeah, I mean, Jose Ferrer was great as the Emperor in the first one. My go-to for a role like that is Max von Sydow, Christopher Plummer.
Yeah.
Both of them much too old. I don't even know. I don't know if Max von Sydow is even alive at this point. Christopher Plummer's not dead, but much too old to cast them there. And I think the comparison to Ming the Merciless would be a little on the nose. Yeah, we'll have to cover that in another show because I think it's one of those. It's easy to think hard about that, but it's also cool to just say, you know what, I'm gonna just kind of, all right, casting director, amaze me again.
Hola, hey, hi, welcome to the show.
So
we're just wrapping up here, so
yeah, there you go.
Timing's not that great
to spoil. The other big casting question is probably will Fade Ralpha be a character in the second? If so, who will that actor be? Sting, in one of his first acting roles, very famously cast as the kind of how would you describe him briefly? The character, not Sting.
So Fade Ralpha is Bistroban's brother, so he's also a nephew of Harkonnen. He is an almost Paul, in that the Bene Gesserit breeding stuff brought him to a point very close to where Paul was. But he's kind of a Chad. His hobby is fighting in the gladiator pits and killing people. So yeah, and he is also the person that the Baron is pinning his really far view of where he wants to take this power that he's going to try to steal on Arrakis and so on with. So that's Fade Ralpha.
Yeah. So in probably the most indelible image from David Lynch's version of Dune is Sting in his mid-20s, railfan, greased up, wearing what I like to refer to as a metal space diaper. It's basically kind of a winged metal-looking loincloth of sorts, and that's it. He's basically knife fighting in a breach clout.
Yep. That's kind of a spoiler, but yes. So let's not talk about what happens with Fade.
I'm just talking about Sting.
Yeah.
So that will be an interesting casting bit. It'd be hard. I mean, if they don't put him in the movie, the only thing I could think of is the scene that we're not talking about would be Beast. Would be Beasterban.
Yeah, that's true.
They just make a one-to-one swap.
I can't see that happening. He's too important a character in what ultimately happens with Paul. Yep. My take would be, I think they should cast him, and I've said this before. I think it should be Andrew Koji from Warrior. Shave his head, shave off his beard, and when he's glowering, he looks close enough to Bautista, just a very thin and thinly muscular version of Bautista, that I think you could get away with it, even though Bautista is not Asian and Koji is half Asian. Um, but I think it would be fantastic. And plus, he is a 3 style martial artist, so he would know how to fight.
Oh, all right. So I just did a real quick thing, and probably not somebody that I would have thought of per se, but a, a spot on bit of casting would be Bill Skarsgård. He was in It. He's Stellan Skarsgård's son. The family resemblance, even under all the makeup, would be pretty solid.
Yep.
He definitely has that face cut from sort of that classic Nordic stock that looks a little evil, depending on how you cast them.
That's a great idea. I never thought of him in that kind of role, but yeah, no. I could see it.
Or Ewan Rheon, if I can never remember if I'm pronouncing his name right. What's it called? Not Theon Greyjoy. Why am I blanking on his name from Game of Thrones? The baddest of the bad guys in his own right.
Euron Greyjoy.
No, not Greyjoy.
No, because that's Pila Icebeck.
But you know who I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, the bastard. Damn it! Now I can't think of the name. The flayed man.
Yes. Ramsay Bolton.
Bolton. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
He can play charismatically dark.
Right. I don't see him as the kind of fighter that Fade is supposed to be, but
fair.
But anyway,
we've
gone way too long now. Greg,
casting. Let's move on.
Recommendation, obviously, but go ahead and say it. And from 1 to 10, where does it sit?
I'm going to give it a solid 2 thumbs up. I strongly recommend seeing it if you like epic space drama. It's drama. It's not space opera.
Yep.
It's obviously, if you've been listening in, it's incredibly well executed. It's beautiful to look at. It's heart pounding where it needs to be and slow paced in a good way that helps bookend that tension. I really, really suggest seeing it in a movie theater. It's great on your home theater system. You can pause it. You can look things up. You can do the IMDb thing. But it's such a visual spectacle and an audio spectacle. Go to see it on IMAX or the biggest screen you can find in your neighborhood.
If you are comfortable with that.
If you're comfortable with that, obviously your mileage may vary. And then watch it on HBO Max at home as well and pick up some of the little things you didn't see. If you haven't read it, see the movie first, get fascinated by it, then go read the book. There's a little too much to digest to do it the other way around, in my opinion. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it a 9.5, in part because I know it had to end, but I was disappointed that it was, okay, we hit this scene, come back in a year and a half, and we'll give you the rest. The score was a little loud at points. I got a little bit tired of that Hans Zimmer loves. Went to that well a bit more often than I would have liked. And I would have enjoyed, as a fan, I would have enjoyed going more into depth about, mentats, why there's no computers and technology, why there's, why everybody in every scene where there's a fight, they're basically fighting with knives and bladed weapons and not space laser guns. But again, no spoilers. I understand why that is. It makes perfect sense in the context of the book. Hopefully, maybe we'll see a little more of that in part 2.
Yeah. So agreed on pretty much all those counts. 2 strong thumbs up. Go see it. Again, if you are able to and comfortable, go see it in a theater. If not, it's wonderful on HBO Max. Hopefully, if you don't have a big TV, go to a relative. Find somebody who's got that 60-inch. And also a 9.5. And not a 10 for the reasons I laid out. 1 or 2 minor weak spots in pardon me, in CGI, particularly the design of Arakeen, and the fact that it's only half a movie. Now, I mean, it's a full movie. Boy, is it a full movie, but it's only half the story. So,
super briefly on this because I know we're running along, but one thing that I wouldn't say I disliked, but less than loved. I found the still suits to be a little off the shelf, considering how good the costume design was for most other things. An awful lot of it looked like the tactical, body armor pieces and gloves that you could buy in, from Amazon and zhuzhed up, as they say. It's not doing it justice. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. It didn't look like you literally just went and bought a bunch of tactical, cheap off the shelf imported tactical gear. But my vision of the still suits were a little more complex than what they gave us.
Yeah, same here. It grew on me.
Yep.
The more I saw it and the more they used it, it grew on me. But initially, same thing. I looked at it and kind of went, you know what? Got a lot of cosplayer friends who could maybe design something a little bit.
An awful lot of people who are already deep into, Lee was on before, seen posts where they're talking about doing his very imperial, or not imperial, Atreides formal attire.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Yeah. All right, folks, that's it. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for being in the chat. Wonderful having you guys chat with us. If you get a chance, we'd love to have you check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/nerdcaliber. That URL's up on your screen right now. We only have 3 tiers. The lowest one is $2. We're basically just use that money to get to other cons, get more content for you here on YouTube, on nerdcaliber.com. The second Saturday gallery from that guy right there, from New York Comic Con, just went live today. So go check it out on nerdcaliber.com. So with that, Greg, give us a goodbye.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully this was a good bit of information and insight from 2 super fans of the movie. If you haven't seen it and you stick through ours, I think we did a pretty good job of avoiding a lot of spoilers.
Yes.
Part 1, part 2 notwithstanding.
Yep.
Hopefully we gave you some good reasons to go see it, and the few things that we didn't love were not remotely in any way showstoppers or deal breakers. Very quick plug, my photo studio, Red Raven Studios, we've got an amazing photo shoot going on this weekend for Magic Wheelchair with a fantastic young girl. My wife and her company are very involved with that. So if you follow any of our online programming, I will probably be hyping it after we get through the photo shoot next weekend and can tell you a bit more about it.
Very cool. And I'm very much looking forward to the photo gallery and write-up that you're going to do for us. Oops. All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us. We will see you at an upcoming show. Let's see. Anime Octane is next Monday's show, and it is looking at the spring 2021 anime SSSS Dynazenon. So join us then if you have seen it, because we also, like this show, we do spoil the shows we talk about on Anime Octane. Nerd Week Live, all sorts of cool trailers have dropped this last week and other interesting news already. So Nerd Week Live next Tuesday. And I should have had this up in front of me, and I don't because I'm not a smart person. But next week, November... where it should be pinned to the top. Why am I not seeing it? I can't see my schedule for our spoiler team. Anyway, we'll have something awesome for you next week. Okay. I got to find out why that post is not showing up in Facebook. Anyway, we will see you at an upcoming show or an upcoming con or wherever we see you. Thank you all very much. Good night and bye.